Thank you for joining us for the AltDev Student Summit. We are pleased to present Ted Spence. Note that you may submit questions via the posted Google Moderator link at any time. We'll address these during the Q&A at the end. Feel free to join the discussion on Twitter using the AltDevConf hashtag. Without further interruption, I would like to turn it over to our presenter.
Hi everyone, my name is Ted Spence. Those of you who may know me might know me from my work recently at EEDAR or from my writing, which I've been posting on AltDev, which has also been shown on Gamasutra. Let me transition you over to a slide that I have here. And today's talk is about being a software developer in the games industry. I've had an interesting experience throughout the industry, and usually in these presentations, EEDAR folks like to start off with our Xbox avatar. And those of you who see this may notice that a couple of my friends showed up unannounced one day and distracted me and dressed me like a hobo, which was kind of fun. This is just something about the kinds of people that you meet and work with in the games industry. They're a lot of fun. I've never worked at a place where I didn't find a lot of really great people. But I've been around since the classic Commodore 64 days. I started doing work in the Windows era, developing CD-ROM games. And back then, this was before we had any 3D, where we were struggling to even get 2D animation to work reliably. I did a variety of internet startups in the late 90s, and I regularly bounced back and forth between working in the games industry and working in corporate software development. And at one point, I was offered a corporate job building IT groups for a company that I immediately recognized as the parent company of Blizzard Entertainment. So naturally, I jumped on this and spent a couple of years working for Vivendi Universal. And then, after managing a couple spin-offs and things like that, I joined a startup done by some friends of mine, which turned into EEDAR, where we did some fun analytics work throughout the gaming industry. And, just any time I tell people about my background, I'm sure you can imagine the number one question somebody says is, oh, wow, you work in the games industry. How can I get in on that? And, today's talk, I'm just basically going to cover this and try to tell you a little bit about what it's like, about what to expect. And this is not a terribly technical conversation, but it's just going to give you a little bit of the practical ideas of how a modern development studio or publishing studio works. I'm sure you can all imagine, and just seeing some of the showcases that I watched a few minutes ago, a lot of you are very talented people, and you've already seen a little bit about how this works. The games industry is a collection of people who love making games, people who want to do incredibly creative work, people who have a passion for what they build. And this really allows us to be a tight-knit group of people collaborating on a shared vision, which is unbelievably exciting. When I had an opportunity to get paid to build my own game, it was just, a dream come true. And, I can't say too much about this. If you have that passion and if you love building games, there's really nothing else that will feel quite as satisfying. But on the other hand, you also have to be aware that there are issues. I'm sure many of you have had a friend come up to you and say, wow, I've got a great idea for a game. Well, the sad truth is that an idea for a game isn't really worth much without the hard work and effort and pain, blood, sweat, and tears that go into making it. A developer who is working on a game will constantly be struggling to fund themselves. And it's a very, very challenging task, especially when games take as long as they do nowadays to build. The executives that you report to have they've worked their entire life to get where they're at, and they're struggling to constantly churn out hits. If the developers that they pick to build their games do not, knock it out of the park, those guys can be out of a career very fast. So they're always under a lot of pressure as well. And naturally, this leads to a situation where publishers are looking for not only a success, but a success that they can continue to repeat year after year, a recurring franchise or some kind of variation. I think the ultimate expression of it is nowadays how Traveler's Tales is building Lego versions of pretty much every popular movie out there. They've just released Lego Pirates of the Caribbean, I think was the most recent one, and they're just continuing to build these games that are fun to play, and they've hit upon a proven success metric for themselves. Additionally, you will notice that when you start getting conversations with people who are working professionally in games development, the money that's available is not as much as what you would get going into corporate software development. And you have to be okay with that. I know people who are accepting, 50% to, maybe 30% of the salary that they could get working in, corporate software, but they're willing to do it because they love it, because this is the thing that makes them happy. And, it's a trade-off, and you have to be willing to make it. And at the same time, I want to mention to everyone that, the console games business, which used to provide so many of us with, rewarding jobs, is gradually fading away and being replaced by, phone games, tablet games, and casual online products. So with this in mind, what can I tell you to be prepared for? The games industry is, and some of you may recognize the Cthulhu reference, there is always something lurking underneath it. The good news is if you're a little bit prepared for it, then you can have a good time, you can enjoy yourself, and you can still make fun things. When you're building games software, you will have a flexible schedule. A lot of people in the corporate world are completely stunned to discover that games developers can show up at 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, or even later in the day and work whatever schedule they feel most comfortable with. Corporate world, they will actually clock you in and out in a lot of places. In the games world, you do spend a lot of time interacting with low-level code, but nowadays a lot of things are gradually moving to managed languages. You get the ability to write without worrying about memory allocation for a lot of scripts and a lot of game logic, but the underlying engines themselves are typically built in very low-level code. Whereas in the corporate world, you're pretty much always going to be working with a high-level language, very abstracted away. You're not going to be very much in tune with the actual hardware. The games world, you get the ability to create really magnificent solutions to problems. Whereas in the corporate world, you wind up doing, what's commonly called journeyman programming. It's where you're not always going to be fine-tuning your algorithms. You're just going to be picking competent, solid products. And then we're going to talk about crunch time and comp time. In the games industry, you will be asked to work longer hours. In the corporate world, if somebody asks you to come in at 10 o'clock at night, you can generally ask for an hour off later. Naturally, some of you may look at this and recognize Dilbert over here, but we won't dwell on that too much. In the games environment, there's actually a lot of different types of software development nowadays. Those of you who are building your own independent projects may spend a lot of time thinking about graphics and engine development, but there's a lot of stuff beneath that. There are tools development, which I'd like to recommend to everyone. Find a Blizzard program and download their development tools. Blizzard makes really fantastic products, and some of my friends there are incredibly competent at what they do. But nowadays, there are a lot of people who are involved in building online web APIs, building the actual fundamental technology platforms, and there's a new career that's really only appeared in the past 3 or 4 years, which is doing mathematical modeling on the data that comes out of your video game. Now, you may notice that on this list here, I've kind of sorted them in terms of the uniqueness of their technology. If you are working in this data analysis arena, you can actually transition directly into working into the corporate world at a big data analysis company with virtually no transition at all. But if you're doing graphics engine programming, that's a little bit harder to take and port over. You may also discover that the people who are working on the most critical, unique code are the ones who are asked to work the longest hours. So let's actually get a bit into this. The companies, what are the companies going to ask you to do? What are they going to talk to you about? The game companies themselves are basically constantly in flux. These game companies are working on products that are a couple years long in many cases, at least when you're talking about the console game developers. They're going to be working for a couple of years at a time on a product, and in many cases you discover that they're not going to be able to survive for lengthy periods of time. Why is that? It's because forecasting the success or failure of a product is really difficult. My work at EEDAR was very much focused on giving people the metrics that they might need in order to help make decisions like that. And when you get that, when you get the forecasting right or when you get it wrong, that can severely affect the success or, well, unfortunate failure of the contract. A game developer who goes to a publisher and gets a contract to write a product, they may not always know exactly what the world is going to be like 2 years out. It's very difficult to plan out what your product is going to need to keep your company successful. So as a result, a lot of the really challenging work is, you'll keep the core competency of your company in-house, but you'll wind out outsourcing a lot of things to independent contractors. This leads to a Hollywood-style model of development. Companies are kind of loose connections of people who will bring in audio engineers, they'll bring in motion capture studios, they'll bring in video production experts, writers, and playtesting units, and they'll mesh them together for the duration of a product, and then they'll separate and they'll go their own ways. And there's always a decent chance that individual companies may fold after a project is done. But the good thing about this is that the games industry is very used to this. We all know as developers and as employees that we may have to jump from company to company, and it's actually very normal. So don't worry too much about that if that happens. If you join a company and the company doesn't make it, it's going to be a little bit of a body blow to everyone, but you will find your way to the next one. Let's get a bit into crunch time. This is one of the key things that people will discover. You get your product, you're pretty happy with it, you've been building it for a couple of months, you've been building it for a couple of years, everybody thinks it's going really well. What's going to happen is management will walk in and they'll say, you know what, good job guys, we're almost done, we just need a little bit more work. So we're going to ask you to put in a little bit of overtime. When they do this, they're going to gradually ramp up. They'll ask you to put in a couple extra hours a day. They may actually ask you to come in on weekends. And generally they'll start off by telling you that it'll take a couple of hours here or there and a couple of months, but then they'll go back to normal afterwards. But you know what? It doesn't always. And if you want to hear a negative perspective on this, you might go and look up the EA spouse letter. This is a little bit old nowadays. I think it dates back to 2004. But it's a good example of what people on the outside will see when you go into crunch time. You're going to be working on a product. You're going to be incredibly passionate about it. You're going to be pouring your heart and soul out every day. But the people on the outside will see you get worn down very rapidly. They'll have a hard time communicating with you, and it can be a difficult adjustment. So you have to be prepared for that. But on the positive side of it, sometimes when everybody brings themselves together in crunch time, you can have an incredible experience. There are some wonderful stories that were written about the creation of the original Macintosh, which are actually very forthright. They're not couched in a lot of weasel words or anything like that. So if you want to hear a positive perspective of crunch time, go read folklore.org. They've got some great stories of how hard they worked and yet how happy they were that it came out well. You may think about this and say, why is this actually happening? Why is it so difficult? Why are the companies going to go bust after putting so much work into things? Well, the sad truth is that we make games all the time. We make good games, we make great games, but the difference between them is huge in terms of sales, success, reputation, rewards, but it's also extremely subtle. It's sometimes very, very hard to tell as a developer whether your product is going to go out there and hit the mainstream and completely set the world on fire, or whether it's going to get out there, make a little bit of money, and then vanish. Every business in the games industry is constantly struggling to figure out what it takes to to make that next product a massive success. You may need certain amounts of talent, certain amounts of specific people with capabilities. You may need a certain amount of really high quality ideas. And you also may need a ridiculous amount of time rounding every corner, smoothing every rough edge, balancing everything tightly so that the people who play the game constantly feel that they're experiencing a challenging product. But and this is also very painful to say, but every game is in fact a throw of the dice. Let me give you an actual story. This is one of the ones that many of you may be familiar with since it's relatively recent. These products came out about 3 years ago now, a little bit more than 3 years ago. They were both open world games where you played a superpowered character, and they both got reasonably good review scores. They were both very gritty, targeted towards the mature audiences. Prototype got pretty good review scores, just under the magic 80 barrier, and Infamous got above the 80 barrier. Now, a lot of people will think, hey, if you got an 83 versus a 79, that will significantly affect your sales. But if you look at this here, Prototype actually sold more units. The sequel sold roughly the same number of units with a little bit of difference here, but yet Radical Entertainment, who had been in business for a decade or more, beyond that, they just closed down recently. And Sucker Punch, the people who are making Infamous, they got acquired by Sony. Now, I don't know that I can proclaim any one magic thing that made one product better than the other. I know Infamous was a Sony exclusive, but both of these products were good, and I knew lots of people who played both of them and who enjoyed them. There's no magic formula. You can't look at these two products a month before release and say, I know this one is going to succeed and this one is going to fail. It's just not possible. With all of that said, if you're prepared for everything and if you're aware of the risks, if you still want to develop games, what can you actually do? Well, most game studios, or people will tell you this, the only real qualification that matters for getting a job in the games industry is prior gaming development experience. There's a lot of stuff about building a game that you just can't learn in a class. You can't necessarily learn by, being in a business environment and building, general purpose software. A game is a magic combination of experience and refinement and art and programming and interesting stories. And what you're doing, what I saw today in the student development showcase, is really fantastic. You've got to find something that makes your game fun to play. And even though some people out there will swear by books like Ralph Koster's Theory of Fun, I don't know that anyone has a conclusive lock on what is it that makes a game satisfying. You guys are already doing student projects. You can join open source projects. You can write an independent game and publish it and self-develop it. Something that I want to encourage all of you is that the thoroughness that is involved in building a game and actually seeing it through from beginning to completion is a very big feather in your cap. If you decide to start your own company or even just do it as an independent person, if you can show to somebody that you are willing to go through the effort that it takes to go into the Apple iOS storefront or to go into the Android Google Play Store and publish your game, bring it through playtesting, bring it through the approval process, validate it, test it on multiple platforms, and release it, what you'll discover is that people will actually react very strongly, very positively, if you've been able to put that effort in. That effort is how you can show to somebody that you're going to be able to take a challenge and carry it through to success. And that's very important. A lot of people out there will create a nifty demo, but without the actual work involved in publishing it or putting it on one of these storefronts, it's a little bit less attractive to a recruiter. Now, another common source is internships. Many of you may see people talk about internships or getting work as a tester. And I've written articles about this in the past. This is certainly possible, but it's difficult. Being an intern or being a game tester takes a lot of effort, takes a lot of work out of you, and it's not always going to be a fun experience. What I can suggest is if you decide you're interested in approaching this path, you have to be prepared to work for a fair amount of effort. You have to be prepared to work for virtually minimum wage. And you also have to be prepared for, luck is going to control a lot about what enables you to step up out of an intern or tester position into a full-time position. So you have to constantly be aware of, what your limit is. If you can only afford a certain number of months, keep that in mind before you start. Now, I haven't actually talked much about resumes, and I do this intentionally because I used to think that resumes were very critical, but not as much anymore. The sad truth is that a resume is really, to an HR manager, a list of reasons to exclude you. Most gaming industry HR managers nowadays will get so many resumes that they will just look at them and say, can I cut this person? Yes. Can I cut this person? Yes. And they'll hand the people who pass all of those tests to the hiring manager. Your connections are the things that will actually get you an interview at the gaming company. It's entirely possible to submit a resume online, but it's not very likely. Once you're actually in there, your interpersonal skills and your ability to talk about your skills, your qualifications, and your excitement for the gaming industry is what will help to win you over to an entry-level job. If you do log on to career websites, it is kind of like firing and forgetting. It's like the shotgun approach. Feel free to submit resumes. Now, I don't want to cast any blame unfairly here, but I submitted my personal resume to a major games industry company a while ago just to see how this would go. And me as a developer with 20 years of programming experience, I received back a response saying, congratulations, we've matched your profile to a 3D animator position. You'd be perfect for this. Call us right now. So clearly, a lot of these websites are automated systems, and they may not be able to look at your personal qualifications separately. And then finally, make sure that you write a cover letter. Talk about what your passion is, make it relevant to the company, and talk about something that company is facing. A couple more words here. Just think about making a portfolio. Your portfolio is going to show what you've accomplished in a visual way, whereas a resume is just kind of talking about it. Of course, you have to include basic facts. Make sure that you write clearly. I can't overemphasize that enough. A lot of people who send me resumes personally have difficulty forming thoughts clearly. So please, show it to someone. And if you need advice, show your resume to someone and ask them what's bad about this resume. I think you'll get more honest feedback that way. And then the final thing that I want to cover is that it's very critical that you build connections with people who are in the gaming industry. Now, obviously, you're joining a conference today. Try to talk to some of the people that you've heard presentations from. Contact them afterwards. Get their information. Feel free to email them. A lot of people here will not be offended if a student reaches out and says, hey, I was hoping I could ask your advice. It's a good idea to do this kind of conversation. Start off reading. Start off gradually moving up and commenting. And then eventually you'll wind up writing articles about what you've done and what you've achieved. Always do it using your own voice. Don't ever silence yourself just because you're afraid of what people would think of your opinions. Try to develop a method of contacting people and saying what you're interested in saying without being abrasive. But doing these connections will give you the ability to hear when a new opportunity shows up. You may talk to someone casually today, and they may think of you the next time they say, oh, hey, we need to hire a new person to do something. You have to always keep your eye open. And this is something else that's very relevant in the gaming industry. Think about the Hollywood-style process. You always need to be open to new opportunities because the games industry is always open to figuring out a new way to build the next product. And with that, I think I've covered the majority of this stuff. This may be very elementary for some of you who have, read the news for a long time, but hopefully this will give you a little bit of a perspective that, getting into the games industry is possible. Getting the chance to develop a game that you really love is possible. And I want to encourage you all to take the time to make something that you care about and do it in a way that leaves you better off. And so with that, I'd like to turn it over to see if we've collected any questions while the presentation is going on.
Thank you, Ted. We don't currently actually have any questions. Our audience seems to be a bit shy at the moment, but I'm sure if you have any additional points to add about maybe transitioning from software into the game development industry in specific, that might spark a little bit more.
Certainly. Well, I'll tell you one of the fun anecdotes that I have from working at the corporate office related to Blizzard. I've had a chance to meet a lot of the people who are developing some of the games that I love and play the most often. And after working at Vivendi for a couple of years, I knew that these people had been locked away in crunch time working on their latest gaming product. And one day while going to lunch at the corporate office for Vivendi, I overhear two of the corporate counsel lawyers talking to each other about how they have to finish some filing or other because Warcraft 3 has gone gold. Now, naturally, I'm very excited for my friends who worked on Warcraft 3, and I made a phone call to them and said, hey guys, congratulations, I just heard Warcraft 3 went gold. I'm very excited for you. I know it's going to be a great success. Now, I didn't think too much of this at the time, but Blizzard is very, very nervous about releases, about their products. And apparently my voicemail messages that I left for them sparked off an internal inquiry into how the information had been released. So my poor friends actually got into a fair amount of trouble for something that didn't actually happen to them. And if you think about this, the reason that things like this happen is because these game products are so very sensitive. We need each of our game products to be extremely successful in order to help all of our companies move on and continue to pay our bills and continue to give us the chance to do the work that we love. So naturally, they're going to be extremely cautious about any bits of information that could jeopardize the successful, smooth release of a game. There's lots of fun experience there. Heather, did anything else click up?
We did have a question pop up, but unfortunately now we're out of time.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. Please feel free to reach out to me. My Twitter hashtag is up here, and thank you very much for your time.
Yes, indeed. Thank you so much, Ted. Thank you all for joining us. Go ahead and check back to the Watch Live page to see our upcoming sessions, and enjoy the rest of AltDev Student Summit. Thank you.